Hello and welcome back to the Editorial, our fortnightly podcast where we, or you, Zach, will acknowledge, apologise, or acknowledgise the mistakes we make. Hopefully,
you might as well, actually.
Oh yeah,
because you are substitute editor-in-chief. When I'm away, Rory steps in.
Yeah, so maybe is that why I've been snuck onto the show this week?
There's a dangerous excess of editorial expertise. You never know.
In case it wasn't obvious, Jack is away, so I'm subbing in. But as always, joined by Zach, editor-in-chief, to take us through things.
I never leave.
Has it been? Is this going to be a long episode? Have we done well in the last 2 weeks?
No, I don't think it's actually going to be a very long episode.
Okay.
There have been. I think what's probably most interesting is where the controversial videos have happened. The last few weeks or last few times done this, there have been a couple, mostly been on global, and then a couple on UK. There's actually very little controversial on global, and I think it can be quite quickly done away with. But actually, there's nothing on UK. The vast majority is on EU.
Really?
Yeah, I know. And I think there are some apologies to be made. So stay tuned. But before we get into the deep ones, I think just some sort of housekeeping. There is a video out today. We're recording this on Wednesday. There's a video out today on Orban's could the EU kick Hungary out of the bloc? And there is a typo in there. It's very old school TLDR. Resort spelled as resort. Just classic. It's not even that funny, but it is.
Made up word.
So that's a tiny little error. Then the Bosnia video we did that about Bosnia's political crisis. I think it was the Dodik, who's the sort of leader of Republika Srpska. I don't think he's been jailed, but he was found guilty of something. Nadia, can you hear me?
Yeah, he's not been jailed yet.
He hasn't been jailed yet. There you go. Live reporting from the ground. Literally the ground. That was 95%. I think there's nothing actually in the video that we have to apologise for. It's just that the thumb was quite clicky. It went for a bit of a classic Will Bosnia split.
Yeah.
And we do say the answer is no, and that he's made this threat many times before to no avail. But I understand people's, that might be on the verge of being a bit too clicky. We do love the Will X country split, and it does feel a bit.
But as countries go for potential splitting, when you've got a guy who is saying he wants to do that, it's probably leans towards the fairer side.
A bullish editor, aren't you?
I want to defend instinctively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think I'd give him a mild apology for that. That was probably quite a clicky thumb. And then again, before we get into the more controversial ones, the two Israel videos, will Israel invade Syria again, and will Israel annex the West Bank, which is your video.
Yes.
Both on about 94, 95%. Those are actually pretty high by sort of Israel video standards, because those videos always get a lower like-dislike ratio. It's normally thanks to sort of opposition from both sides of the political aisle. You get people who saying we're not being sufficiently critical of Israel, and you get people saying that we're being sort of too critical of Israel, and that brings it down. I saw nothing wrong in the West Bank video, so unless you have anything that you noticed.
I haven't I only looked at some of the top comments, and they're generally okay. I think it's just a general vibe.
I think it's on like 95.5, and actually, frankly, that's very high.
Yeah.
There's a sort of, joke is the wrong word, but Rory does tend to get the highest like-dislike ratios, and so I think that's pretty good, to be fair, 95.5. Yeah. For an Israel video.
Yeah, it could have been, it's obviously a very
it's a
sort of high-tempered topic.
The one thing I would say about the Israel invading Syria video is that there was a point there which got a little bit of resistance, where we say Israel is illegally occupying Syrian land. That might feel like quite a strong choice of words, but that was after we talked about the Israeli movement into that UN buffer zone, and the fact that the UN considers it legal, plus the fact that Israel's stated reason for doing it, which was that the agreement had been voided by the collapse of the Assad government, is not normally an acceptable reason. That is not sort of normal interpretation of treaty law. So I think that is a justified description of what essentially is happening in the Golan Heights and the UN buffer zone to the side of it. So those are the two global ones that required talking about. Astonishingly, actually, I think all the other global videos have been above target, which is quite something given how much Trump content we've done.
And
normally
heavily Trump.
But there you go. Then we have, I think, 2 EU videos, both of them I wrote, that are lower, a fair bit lower than normal. The first is why Trump wants to normalize relations with Russia, which is on 94%. The main issue here, I mean, there's obviously, you normally give that lower like-dislike ratio when it's a controversial topic, and it is a controversial topic, and there'll be people who dislike just because they don't like the idea of America and Russia buddying up to one another. But a lot of people were just saying we're saying washing again, or sort of giving Trump too much credit, and it's not some clever reverse Kissinger. It's just because he likes autocrats. Yeah. What I would say here is that maybe we could have put a caveat at the start of the video, but I think in general we try very, very hard to avoid psychologizing politics. And I think that's just quite a good rule of thumb for any outlet that wants to be neutral. I understand that it's tempting, and you can probably provide sort of quite persuasive arguments that that occasionally psychological explanations do hold explanatory weight. But I think it's a bit of a slippery slope. And I think that when journalists start psychologizing leaders, it quite quickly ends up being a little bit sort of like, neo-Freudian in a sort of faux intellectual way. And then also just sort of lends itself to partisanship. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you can give examples. I mean, just in the Trump case, you can obviously give examples where he has said publicly sort of friendly things about, Putin or Kim Jong-un or whoever. But I think when it comes to like analyzing actual policy, you sort of do have to sort of try and delve a bit deeper into it than just going for that, like, oh, we must just like Putin thing.
Yeah.
Especially as, I guess, with the US's Russia policy, it's not just Trump sort of, I guess he obviously has a massive influence over it, but there are other people.
That is genuinely one of the other caveats that it's made me think a fair bit recently, is that one of the reasons, again, I'm wary of psychologizing is you're right. Normally, in a sort of like whatever Trump might say, the administration's posture as a whole is determined not just by his personal whims, but also the sort of like, the aggregate outcome of him and all the policymakers around him. Their sort of like aggregate opinion. But in this case, it might not be true.
Yeah. I mean, in other cases, it does seem to just be the whims of Trump, like tariffs, for example. The back and forth flip-flopping is insane.
Yeah, honestly. So that is the case that has basically convinced me that clearly this administration really does run on Trump's whims. The tariff stuff, not the other reason that tariff stuff is so clearly whims-based, vibes-based, whims-based, is that other people in Trump's administration, so Stephen Mirren, who's the head of his sort of like economic Affairs Council, and Scott Bessent, who's his Treasury Secretary, they have made their opinions on tariffs really quite explicit. They've published pieces talking about what their ideal tariff policy would be, and it's just not Trump's. Yeah. So clearly, it's Trump's whims. Yeah. Scott Bessent, that was in the Financial Times, talking about a universal tariff of 2.5% that would gradually be moved up, which is something that I think, if you're worried about a trade deficit, it's a very sensible policy. But the fact that was sort of leaked to the FT earlier on was proof that A, Bessent has different take to Trump, obviously, but also B, that he knew that he was being sidelined, and he was sort of being like, well, maybe I can...
I want to get my idea out there. And
then not at all. Yeah. No, you're going to get 50% aluminium tariffs on for 8 hours, and then we'll take them off later. Yeah. I think that is one of the reasons that actually covering Trump is so difficult, is that you want to avoid personalistic sort of cheap psychology takes. But sometimes, annoyingly, they do hold explanatory weight. I don't mean it. I'm getting all my metaphors mixed up here. When the actual policy is so clearly dictated by Trump personally. But anyway, leaving that aside, I think that is a relevant caveat, but I still think we will avoid psychologizing. I think it's a good rule of thumb. I can't really give you more than that, unfortunately. I think it, therefore it happens.
Yeah. And that was one of the 2 EU ones you were
And the next one I'm going to do a bit more apologizing. Is about the Ukraine retreats in Kursk but makes gains in Donbas. What next? Video that came out a couple of days ago on EU. There are 2 things I think I'm going to apologize for here. First, the original thumb was, is Ukraine actually winning? That's just... that's too clickbaity. I'm sorry about that. I don't know. I don't really have an excuse. It was just bad.
It was desperate.
It was desperate, yeah. bit strong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Apologies.
But yeah.
I'm psychologizing you there.
Yeah. It was anyway, that was a mistake, so sorry about that. That's too clickbaity. Again, I can't really provide like a more reasons for why it was, but it just feels like it was too far in retrospect. We changed it, but still apologies for that. Sorry, this video has about 92%, which is low.
Okay, yeah.
And then there's sort of two other things. No, maybe one other thing I was going to apologize for. I was going to apologize for making too much of the gains that Ukraine has made in Donbas, but I actually don't think that's true. I do think that basically the fact that the tide has slightly changed direction does suggest that at least Russia can't make speedier advances than it has been making recently. It seems like with the sort of ceasefire looming, they tried. The Kremlin wanted to make some more substantial advances before the front lines were effectively frozen, and it does look like that has backfired. And I think that is informative. But I think we make too much of those gains relative to the Russian gains in Kursk. And unfortunately, some of this is just a timing issue, right? In that video I started writing over the weekend. It was before the sort of Russian sort of, I don't know what you would call it, retaking of territory in Kursk had accelerated. And by the time that video went out, the Russian sort of advance in Kursk had accelerated and developed to such an extent that the way we described it looked like we were trivializing it. And that is just, I think, a large part just a consequence of the lag between when a video is written and when it actually comes out. But nonetheless, I think it would have been frustrating as a viewer. So apologies for that. What do you think?
I don't know if it's recency bias, but it does feel like just on all sorts of different fronts, things are moving so much quicker than usual.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump's obviously a good example with the speed at which he changes his mind on things. The timeline for how we make videos is effectively, maybe from the beginning of writing a script, it might be an evening of a day and then the morning of the next day, and then the video gets animated through that day and the video comes out the next day. So you're like at least 24 hours after starting writing.
Yeah.
Which just so many things can happen.
Yeah.
And there's not really much we can do about that other than try and sort of plug in as much recent information as we can and maybe pin a comment where necessary, but it's one of the tough parts of the job.
Desperate pin comment. And when we were really in the rhythm of doing those Ukraine map videos, Alex, one of our animators, we had a sort of little deal where like we would write throughout the day as it happened, and then the video would come out the next morning. But that was because we had such like a smooth process that didn't put a strain on anyone's sort of like time. Whereas now, because Alex is away, so didn't animate that video, but also because we don't do them so frequently, they're not easy to animate, and they're actually quite hard. They're quite map intensive, which means that you have to sort of write it the day before. It has to be done by 9-10 a.m. on the Monday to be animated throughout that day and come out at 10 on the Tuesday. So there is, you're right, a 24-hour lag. But yeah, the Trump stuff has been particularly difficult in that respect. I woke up, yesterday must have been, and there was all the trade war stuff, and I was like, we could do one on the US-Canada trade war. And then, had I written that video, it would have been
within hours. Yeah.
And the trade war stuff I really struggled to write about. The last trade war video we did, we had that was the issue. We had to do a rush thing at the very last minute because he suddenly paused the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, and then we looked a bit silly. And also, it's again partly because I think it's all down to Trump. It's very hard to do a proper analysis, to be like, what next? Because whatever he wants, really, and that does make life difficult. But I think we talked about this a couple of editorials ago. I think the solution is that we probably actually, this hasn't been true recently because there's been a lot of economic stuff that we've decided to cover, and I think we will actually continue to cover it. But we are just going to sort of stay away from the more whimsical Trump stories, because is that the etymology of
I guess it is, but whimsical, I'm imagining him sort of just like walking through a forest and I don't know, having fun.
It's a good AI video to be made there. But yeah, so I think we just have to stay away from those because they normally don't really come to anything substantial. They're normally just like aggressive headlines and then but B, they're just too fast moving for us, unfortunately.
Yeah. And that's the next 4 years, I suppose.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, it's the next 4 years.
Yeah. So that's all our
That's it.
videos for this week.
You got anything really on your mind? As the
There's always
editor-in-chief?
lots on my mind, but not for this podcast. Yeah, I don't know. How does this usually end? I can't remember.
Badly.
Yeah,
Normally. It's just,
so just like
suddenly.
this. Yeah. Let us know in the comments if you forgive us for the things we've apologized for.
Oh yeah,
If
we do
missed
this.
anything.
Yeah, if you let us know in the comments if there's anything we've forgotten. 'Cause sometimes we do forget. Sometimes the dislike ratio is sufficiently high that just skips them by. But nice. Thank you
Thanks.
for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And you. That's a good way to end it.
Nice.